Welcome to this explainer. Think about the last time your phone's GPS glitched out. You missed a turn and suddenly you're just completely lost for, 10 minutes? Now I want you to imagine a bird, a creature that sometimes weighs literally less than a standard AA battery. It takes off, flies thousands of miles, crosses literal oceans, and then returns to the exact same branch in your backyard a year later. Today we're going to treat this familiar, everyday piece of magic as a marvel of systems engineering. We totally take it for granted, but the biological infrastructure required to make that flight happen, it's absolutely staggering.
So, the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves is, how does a bird leave a familiar territory, fly those massive distances, and return to the exact same region? To really answer this, we need to completely dismantle the popular idea that birds just have some single infallible biological GPS built into their brains. Actually, it's not like that at all. Instead, we're going to look at the incredibly complex, layered, and highly redundant sensor fusion stack operating right beneath the flight.
Here is our schematic for today's explainer, dissecting this biological mystery layer by layer. We'll cover 1. The system beneath the flight. 2. Orientation versus true navigation. 3. The avian sensor array. 4. The magnetic compass hypothesis. 5. System failures and redundancies. And finally, 6. The complete navigation stack. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, the system beneath the flight. Let's dive in by observing how young migrants actually initiate their journey without any prior experience.
Think about booting up a drone for the very first time right out of the box. It needs base-level instructions just to get moving, right? Well, for juvenile birds, this initialization is called vector navigation or clock and compass orientation. It's basically an inherited genetic program, a built-in biological code that dictates a specific direction and a specific flight duration. It's an instruction that essentially just says, hey, fly south for 3 weeks. They don't have a map yet, and they've literally never seen their destination. They just fly on this predetermined vector. But as we'll see, this is really just the foundational layer. It's for sure not enough to guarantee they'll pinpoint an exact location on a map.
Moving on to Section 2, Orientation versus True Navigation. To really grasp this system, we have to strictly define the mechanical problem these birds are solving.
Because here's the thing, having a compass alone is absolutely not the same thing as having a map. We have to separate orientation from true navigation. Orientation is simply choosing and maintaining a compass heading. You know which way is south, so you fly south. Simple enough. But true navigation, that's what allows a bird to course correct if a massive storm blows it hundreds of miles off track. That requires estimating your current position relative to a specific destination. You have to know exactly where you are on the map to know how to get back to your path.
Which brings us to Section 3, the avian sensor array. Let's look at the hardware and see how this builds into a redundant system of environmental inputs.
Birds don't just rely on one data stream. Look at this flock. They aren't just blindly following a leader up front. Each bird acts as a mobile sensor node, continuously processing multiple streams of environmental data. They aren't flying blind. They are constantly sampling the world around them, pulling in immense amounts of telemetry to update their internal positioning systems on the fly.
So how do they do it? Their biological hardware actually fuses multiple inputs. By day, they track the sun's position, running it against their internal circadian clock to calculate a true heading. At twilight, they calibrate those internal compasses using patterns of polarized light in the atmosphere. And at night, this is wild, they literally read the rotation of the star field. That requires built-in chronometer abilities just to process the shifting night sky. They also cross-reference learned physical landmarks like coastlines or rivers, and in selected species, they even use olfaction, their sense of smell, to build an odor map. It is a highly redundant, absolutely brilliant multi-sensor network.
Let's look closer at one of those sensors in Section 4, the magnetic compass hypothesis. How exactly do birds sense magnetic north?
Well, to understand this, we have to look at two distinct proposed systems. First up, there's the magnetic compass, which appears to be light-dependent and detects the inclination of the magnetic field lines. Inclination basically tells them the tilt or the angle of the magnetic field relative to the Earth's surface. That gives them direction, but not necessarily north versus south polarity. Then there's the magnetic map. This detects the intensity or position of the field, potentially utilizing the trigeminal nerve in the beak or even biomineralized magnetite crystals to give the bird a sense of its actual geographic location on the globe.
And this brings us to the prime mover theory for that light-dependent compass, the cryptochrome 4 radical pair hypothesis. It breaks down a highly complex chemical chain reaction happening right inside the bird's retina. It starts when blue light enters the eye and excites a molecule called the FAD cofactor. This creates spin-correlated radical pairs. Now think of these like microscopic subatomic compass needles inside the eye that physically react to the Earth's ambient magnetic field. The field modulates the spin states of these electrons, changing the chemical output. This creates a signaling state that is transmitted directly down the optic nerve. Essentially, the bird might literally see the magnetic field superimposed right over its vision. It's almost like they have a built-in heads-up display.
Now hold on, we need to pause and emphasize some scientific uncertainty here. While the cryptochrome 4 and radical pair models are utterly fascinating, these mechanisms are highly species-specific. They are not a settled universal rule for all birds. Some species show completely different cryptochrome affinities, and the exact physical basis for the magnetic sense is still heavily debated in the scientific community. It's crucial we remain objective here. We can't treat hypotheses like quantum biology, olfaction, or magnetite in the beak as blanket facts for every single migrating bird.
Okay, Section 5. System failures and redundancies. So what happens when this complex sensor fusion stack encounters conflicting data? Or environmental stress? Like any complex engineering system, it has failure points. Consider this historical experiment with Manx shearwaters. When they were released under a clear sky, they quickly oriented and flew off in the correct direction. No problem. But, as this quote highlights, if the sky was overcast at the time of release, the shearwaters flew around in circles. When those thick clouds blocked their celestial sensor data, the birds suffered a catastrophic system failure. They were entirely unable to orient.
The navigation stack can actually fail in several known ways. Overcast clouds block the sun and the stars. Artificial light at night severely corrupts visual and potentially even magnetic compass cues. High crosswinds can induce physical drift, pushing a bird way off its inherited vector. And, unlike our cars or phones, birds don't have a pleasant robotic voice saying recalculating when geomagnetic disturbances from powerful human antennas alter their flight paths. Furthermore, when researchers artificially rotate the stars in a planetarium setting, it creates a cue conflict, forcing the birds to entirely misdirect their orientation.
But the system has remarkable redundancies built in to handle these exact kinds of errors. Take Eurasian reed warblers, for example. Researchers discovered they use their trigeminal nerve as a corrective feedback loop. When these birds were experimentally displaced a massive 1,000 kilometers to the east, really think about that scale, 1,000 kilometers off course, they were still able to re-navigate and correct their path. But here is the catch. They could only do this if their trigeminal nerve was intact. If that specific data stream was severed, the feedback loop failed, proving just how heavily they rely on fused biological hardware to fix those massive displacement errors.
Finally, Section 6, the complete navigation stack. We've reverse engineered the individual components, so now let's synthesize the blueprint of the complete system and look at the flow of information.
Navigation is really a causal handoff. It tells a complete story of the flight. A young bird boots up in stage 1 with that inherited vector we talked about. As it flies, stage 2 kicks in, fusing live sensor data from the sun, stars, and magnetic fields using retinal hardware like Cry-4. Now, if a storm blows it off course, stage 3 uses the magnetic map or physical landmarks to estimate its new position, while stage 4 corrects and maintains the heading through continuous feedback. Finally, at stage 5, the bird reaches its destination and maps that entire route into its brain for next year.
Because once a bird has completed its first migration, the whole system upgrades. Experienced adults, like this female canvasback duck, rely heavily on their memory of learned routes, geographic landmarks, and imprinted coordinates. An incredible 75% of adult female canvasbacks return to the exact same breeding pothole year after year. They essentially bypass the rigid limitations of that inherited genetic vector and navigate using a rich, highly personalized spatial map.
Which brings us to a final, pretty pressing thought. This redundant navigation stack has evolved over millions of years to perfectly read very specific environmental cues. But as human activity continues to introduce artificial light, alter coastlines, and shift the climate, effectively scrambling the very data these birds rely on, we really have to ask, will the system beneath remain resilient enough to adapt? Or are we pushing this biological engineering past its failure boundaries? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this changes how you see the next flock flying over your home.